The sun rose slowly over the desert plains of Midian, casting golden light across the barren hills. The air was dry and still. Moses, a man now well into the quiet rhythm of shepherd life, moved among the rocks and scrub with practiced ease. He had been in this land for years, far from the grandeur of Egypt, far from the mistakes of his past. Each day looked much like the one before. He guided his flock to water, protected them from predators, and found shade where he could. To most, it would seem an unremarkable life. But to Moses, it was a kind of exile, a season of survival and silence. He had once been someone of importance, raised in the palace of Pharaoh, trained in leadership and knowledge. Yet he had thrown it all away in a moment of rage when he killed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. The act had been born from a sense of justice, but it branded him as a fugitive. Now, the desert was his refuge. Still, even in the silence, there were questions that gnawed at him. Was this his final chapter? Had he been cast aside forever, destined to grow old in anonymity, away from the cries of his people and the God of his ancestors? It was during a day like any other that everything changed. As Moses led the sheep to graze near Mount Horeb, known also as the Mountain of God, his eyes caught something unusual. It was a flame, bright and flickering, tucked among the bushes. At first, he thought it was just the sun hitting the rocks or a brush fire sparked by the dry winds. But as he drew closer, he realized this was no ordinary flame. The bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. No smoke curled into the sky. No leaves crumbled into ash. The branches remained intact. The fire burned, but nothing was consumed. Intrigued and unsettled, Moses stepped closer. He narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. And then he heard it. A voice, clear, firm, and unlike anything he had ever heard, called his name. Moses. Moses. His body froze. The sheep wandered a few paces away, sensing a shift in the air. Moses turned his full attention toward the flame. "Here I am," he said. "Do not come any closer," the voice warned. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." His hands trembled as he bent down and untied the straps of his sandals. He removed them and stood barefoot on the dusty earth. It felt the same beneath his feet, but everything in the air had changed. There was weight, a sense of divine presence he could not explain. "I am the God of your father," the voice continued, "the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses immediately covered his face. He dared not look directly at the flame. This wasn't just an unexplained phenomenon. This was sacred. This was holy. And God was speaking directly to him. "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt," said the voice. "I have heard their cries. I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them and to bring them into a land flowing with milk and honey. And now I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." The words hit Moses like a storm. Him? Go back to Egypt? Speak to Pharaoh? Lead a nation? The weight of it pressed on him immediately. "Who am I," he whispered, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" "I will be with you," God replied, "and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Even with this promise, Moses hesitated. His doubts rushed to the surface. "What if they ask me your name?" he said. "What should I tell them?" "Tell them, I am who I am. Say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you." These were words of power, of identity, of authority that transcended time. God was not giving Moses a mission alone. He was revealing his character. Moses stood in awe. His mind reeled. His soul trembled. He had nothing to offer. He was not eloquent. He was not influential. And yet, he had just been given a calling that would change the course of history. Let's pause for a moment. Many of us feel like Moses. We've been in seasons where life feels routine, even forgotten. We wonder if we've missed our chance. We question whether our past disqualifies us from a meaningful future. But the story of Moses reminds us that God does not forget. He sees. He calls. And he chooses people not because they are ready, but because they are willing. If you're watching this today and feel like your life has been stuck in the wilderness, maybe it's time to turn aside and pay attention to the flame in your life. That nudge, that conviction, that sense that there's something more. Let me ask you, have you ever felt God calling your name? Not with an audible voice, but in that deep place inside you that knows something needs to change? Don't ignore it. Turn aside. Pay attention. Take off your sandals. You might be standing on holy ground. And if this message speaks to you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know how these stories are reaching hearts around the world. We post stories like this every week to encourage you to walk boldly in faith. Now, let's return to Moses. As he stood before the burning bush, he realized he was not just encountering God. He was being called to lead, called to stand before Pharaoh, called to challenge injustice, called to trust. The staff in his hand, once used for guiding sheep, would become a symbol of divine power. The voice that spoke from the flames would guide his every step, and the desert that had once felt like exile would become the beginning of purpose. The moment Moses returned to the people was sacred. Every eye in the camp turned to him. Every breath seemed to still. He descended the mountain slowly, the 2 tablets held securely in his arms. No one could look directly at his face, for it radiated a light too holy for mortal eyes. The people gasped. Some shielded their faces. They had never seen anything like it. But what Moses brought down was more than stone. He carried covenant. He carried clarity. He carried the very voice of God inscribed by divine fire into tangible form. He gathered the elders and then the rest of the people. With great care, he set the tablets down, one on each side of the meeting tent. He spoke gently, his voice steady, but filled with awe. His words recounted the thunder, the smoke, the fire, and the moment when God wrote the commandments by his own hand. And then Moses read the words aloud. He didn't shout. He didn't embellish. He simply spoke the truth, and the people listened. Each word seemed to land like a drop of rain on thirsty ground. Some wept. Others bowed. There was no arguing, no debate. In their hearts, they knew this law was unlike any other. It was not made by men, but by the one who had rescued them. Still, even as reverence filled the air, a sense of fear began to grow. The people remembered the mountain. They remembered the trembling earth, the unapproachable fire, the overwhelming sound of God's voice. They remembered how they had begged Moses to speak for them, because they couldn't bear to hear God directly. And now, seeing the light of God's glory shining from Moses' face, they feared that even being near him might be too much. Moses noticed this. He saw them shrink back. He saw the awe turn into anxiety. And so, out of mercy, he placed a veil over his face. The radiance was too intense. He didn't want his closeness to God to push the people away. He wanted them to draw near, to hear the words, and to walk in the truth they'd been given. He assured them that the commandments were not meant to crush them, but to guide them. They were not a burden, but a blessing, a way to live differently than the world around them, a path to holiness, a path to life. The commandments weren't simply about what not to do. They were about shaping the heart. To worship only God meant trust. It meant freedom from the chains of false gods and empty promises. To honor parents wasn't just obedience. It was about honoring the generations and building a culture of respect. To rest on the Sabbath wasn't laziness. It was trust that God would provide even when they ceased striving. Each commandment carried layers of wisdom. Each one drew them deeper into the character of God. As Moses explained, the people began to see it. They saw how the commandments weren't just a list. They were a mirror, a reflection of what it meant to be set apart, to be chosen, to be free. But freedom required discipline. Freedom required boundaries. And that was something they struggled to understand. Because even though they had seen God's miracles, even though they had been rescued from slavery, even though they now had his law written in stone, there were still whispers of rebellion deep within the camp. And Moses sensed it. He knew that being given the law didn't automatically mean the people would follow it. He had seen their complaints in the wilderness. He had heard their grumbling about food, their longing to return to Egypt, their doubts about God's provision. And now he had seen something even more dangerous: spiritual distance. The people were afraid of God, but not in the holy way. They respected his power, but they didn't seek his presence. They were willing to follow Moses, but reluctant to draw close to the one who called them. That Moses knew had to change. He gathered the leaders again and reminded them God had brought them to himself, not just out of Egypt. This covenant wasn't about performance. It was about relationship. God didn't just want obedient people. He wanted a faithful people. And so Moses taught them, over and over, what the commandments meant. He explained how honoring God's name meant living lives of integrity, how not stealing meant more than avoiding theft. It meant respecting others' dignity and property, how not coveting required contentment and trust. These weren't just national laws. They were deeply personal. They were an invitation to live as God's people in every area of life. The days turned into weeks. Moses spent long hours in the tent of meeting, face to face with God. When he came out, he continued to teach, to counsel, to lead. The veil remained when he was with the people, but when he returned to God, he removed it. There, in the presence of the Lord, he was fully known and unhidden. The people began to notice something else too. When they obeyed the commandments, things were different. There was peace. There was unity. There was a sense of direction. But when they ignored them, confusion crept in, disputes rose, hearts wandered. It became clear God's commands were life. And yet, obedience would prove harder than they imagined. For though God had carved the law into stone tablets, he desired to write it on their hearts. That was a process still unfolding. Moses looked out across the camp. He knew they had far to go, not just geographically, but spiritually. But for now, they had what they needed. They had a covenant. They had a leader. And they had the word of God. The tablets rested safely in the ark. The people had received the commandments. The mountain still stood, silent now, but echoing with memory. And Moses, veiled and glowing, remained the living testimony that it is possible to enter into the presence of God and return changed.